He knew there was this big Sorbus domestica. He was looking for it, and he kept walking by this tree and saying, "Oh, it's a nice oak, but it's not the tree I'm looking for." Turned out it's a massive Sorbus domestica standing all by itself in a field.
Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world. Bringing us into this here episode 487 of Cider Chat was Ben Kunesh. He was talking about a giant Sorbus domestica tree that is based in Paris. He was with our friend Arnold, also known as the French Pope of Sorbus domestica. Now, I have had both Arnold first on this podcast and then Ben, and I'm going to tell you some of those episodes because this is a palm fruit. This is related to the apple, to the pear, to the quince. They kind of look like mini pears. They do have overtures of chocolate, so we're going to get into that. You got to stay tuned, but let me just bring you up to date, because if you don't know about Sorbus domestica, what are you waiting for? This is just such an incredible historical fruit on so many levels. So I want to first direct you to this episode that I recorded in 2020 at the Cider Expo in France with Arnold. It was titled, "Can Sorbus domestica Save the World?" And I did not choose that title lightly. I mean, that's really how I feel about this particular fruit. And then we had him, actually the first episode was 219, called Sorbs, Not Sulfite. Now, if you are in fermentation, you know that sulfites are one of those, we call it like a preservative, really, that you put into the ferment to protect it, essentially. And we found, at least Arnold found in the literature, that sorbs, little green sorbs, were used instead of sulfites. So that's an episode you want to check out. And then we had, again, Ben on episode 304 called Falling for the Chocolate Pear. And that was where we really first got into what the travels are and heard about this book all on the Sorbus domestica tree, which is now translated to English. Ben and I will be talking about that. And then we had another follow-up episode with a maker in France, and that was Marie, and she makes a very unique product called la cormé-style, and it's it's a passion ferment where Arnold goes and he picks all these sorbs, gives them to Marie and her husband, and they produce this exquisite product. So there are a couple makers in France doing this. Probably the best known maker is Eric Bordelais. His product is called cormé, and that's the French word for Sorbus domestica fruit. And he has been making that product since 2017. And it's incredible. And then you have Marie, who's also been doing it. So this is actually you would say like a historical drink almost that is slowly coming back. And what's super cool about this conversation is that we are seeing Sorbus domestica being planted more and more in the U.S. It is not native to this area. And between a couple of us who have been talking about it and, egging everybody out there in Ciderville on, a whole bunch of sorbs have been planted in the U.S. And that's spectacular. That's going to be cool for the future generation. So Ben is our featured guest on this week's episode. We'll be going to that feature shortly. But first, as always, we have a wee bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. I got this little email in from my friend Alan Supernat, and I'm going to read what he wrote. Chile Cider, Patagonia, enjoyed that episode. Alan, it's so good to hear from you. I'm glad you're doing well. And he has some things going on here, but he said a few years back he had 13 folks from Chile visiting, and they were great to be with. So I have no doubt because, they have it going on in terms of apples and cider. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the past 2 episodes on the Chilean panel and also the edible forest of Chile just prior to this episode going live. Anywho, Alan has a couple workshops coming up here in February. He is an apple head. He's well versed in this topic. So if you want to do this and you are in Western Massachusetts or New England, you could travel. Check it out. On February 26th, he has These Apples Have Soul. It's at 6 p.m. It's going to be taking place at the Permaculture Center in Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, and it's on biodynamic orcharding. Again, These Apples Have Soul. And then there's going to be a workshop called Pruning for Home Orchards. That's a really key one. And that's going to be morning classroom and after classroom in the orchard with hands-on pruning, April 26th or April 4th. It's the 4th of April. I think it's April 4th of April, I think, from 10 to 4 p.m. And that's what he's going to be doing there. So I will have a link in the show notes on how to get a hold of Alan if that's up, part of your cup of tea. So first one's in February 26th. So the end of that month coming right up. And then in between that is also CiderCon. So that's the first week of February. That's going to be taking place in Providence, Rhode Island. I will be there. If you are too, well, then let's definitely raise a glass and check in, see how it's going. As always, I like to say this, and it's more me than you, but when you meet me, please introduce yourself. Tell me your name because I get just like tornado brain. I can't take it all in, and I'll recognize you or I might not recognize you, and I try to put it together, and I really want to make those connections. So please don't be offended. I'm doing the best I can. I have almost 500 episodes with folks, and it gets a little bit too much for my bandwidth. So help me out if you see me there, okay? So that's CiderCon, first week of February. And then coming up in April is the UK Blossom Time Cider Tour. Check this out. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you can see Matilda Temperley of Somerset Cider and Brandy Company leading me around the gift shop and also where the little apple elevator is. This is really ancient. We're going to see that. We're going to be able to hang out with her and her father, Julian Temperley, who is just, I don't know, he's a huge apple figure in his own right. And I have had an episode with them. So you do want to check that out if you can. It's just one of the many amazing spots we're going to be checking out on this tour. So yeah, Somerset, Gloucestershire, Herefordshire, and Wales, and all during blossom time. It will be magnificent, and we have a nice complement of folks signing up for that. And then in September, it's the French Cider Tour headed to Paris, Normandy, and Brittany. If you'd like to go, you want a little bit more info, just go to ciderchat.com. You'll see a little link there that says Totally Cider Tours, and that will help you navigate to see the itinerary and see the dates and all that jazz, and also the email to connect with us, which is info@ciderchat.com, to get you signed up today. Walking through the orchard. Next is our feature presentation with Ben Kunesh, once again telling us all about the chocolate pears, aka Sorbus Domestica, making it a very fine time to grab a glass and join this chat. But first, I want to just welcome you back, Ben, to Cider Chat. It's so good to see you. I'm really excited to talk about where have you been in terms of the sorbs and what you're finding out. Sorbus Domestica is kind of like the Latin term for it. And it feels very, I don't know, like transformer type of name. Most of us kind of like do a little shortcut, just calling it sorbs. How do you refer to these fruit if you're just kind of catching up with Ben and I here right now? It is a fruit and it's a tree, Sorbus Domestica tree. How do you refer to it?
I'll usually call the tree the service tree, which is sort of the English common name. The fruit I would typically refer to as sorb, just because that's also seems to be the accepted name. But when talking to people that don't know what that is, which is the overwhelming majority of people, the chocolate pear is sort of a term that emerged from trying to put it into more common English words. I think that name originated with Matt Van Boven, who's the farmer that originally told me about the species back in 2018. But in particular, my partner Lauren, when people ask me about Sorbus Domestica and I start to give a 10-minute explanation of all the history and the growth habit and botanical classification and all these things, she'll almost always just jump into the conversation and say, it's a chocolate pear. And that answers a lot of questions people have, which is, what does it look like? And to some extent, what does it taste like?
And does it make sense to you? Because you definitely have tasted more little sorbs than I have, in my time kind of being part of this. So are you getting that chocolate sense as you've been tasting it in the different regions?
It really depends on the one, but I do think, for one thing, chocolate describes the color that when you eat it, it's brown and blooded, and I think that's helpful because many people are surprised if they try to eat it when it's yellow or red or green, just by how astringent it is. So by planting that seed, the visual of chocolate, and thinking, okay, well, it's not weird to eat a brown fruit because we eat other brown things like chocolate. I think it's helpful for that reason. I do think there's a little bit of chocolate flavor or aromatic scent with the fruit, but that really depends a lot on the variety and just exactly how blooded it is.
Hmm.
So I think it's helpful just sort of connoting pleasant food associations with with the fruit when you're talking about something that's so unfamiliar and underappreciated
Hmm.
as sorbs are.
What you're saying, like when it's bletted, and for folks who are hearing that term for the first time, that's kind of like the ripening from the inside. And, you start with these like kind of yellow, maybe with a little orange hue, little reddish hue to it. And it is related to palms. So they're in that family of apples and pears and medlars. I could see, when it's ripened, it does go into that dark color, but I have eaten them when they weren't all the way there, especially that tree that's at the Arnold Arboretum in up near Boston here in Massachusetts. Those little sorbs were pretty yellow, and it was very custard like when I was eating it. So, what do you have to say about that?
Well, depending on the individual, I would say variety, but in this case, we're almost certainly talking about seedlings. The fruit is really, really variable. So I've tasted ones that are perfectly edible, not very tannic, when they're yellow or red. In France, in particular, I found one that was incredibly sweet. It just tasted just like a pear when it was kind of a creamy white inside and hadn't turned brown at all. So I would say it really depends on the individual. There's others I've tasted that are completely tannic until they're fully brown and squishy, at which point I would compare it to a medlar. But for people who don't know what that is, I'll sometimes compare it to a persimmon too, that needing to go through that extra,
Hmm.
like a hachia type persimmon that needs to go through that extra post ripening
Yeah.
phase to lose its astringency and become sweet. The
Mm.
ones in Boston, did you try any that were brown or just in that yellow custardy stage?
I don't really think I got any that were brown. They were in that kind of cut. I don't wouldn't have wanted them to go any further to be just eating them like that. I really liked the taste where I had it. I was like, my goodness, this is almost like kind of applesaucey, but a little custardy. It was a nice texture. So it kind of surprised me. And that is an older tree. That was like 1947, and it said on the plate from the Czech Republic.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, that's interesting too, because the stage at which they're pressed for cider or cormé in Normandy, I know, is in that yellow stage
Mm.
where they're not fresh off the tree. They've sat maybe for a couple of days, but before they've gone to that brown stage, my understanding is if it's gone brown, it's too far to for
Ferment.
the press for cider.
Yeah.
Now in Eastern Europe, that they'll use the brown ones for making brandy.
Hmm.
But I think when they press it for gourmet, it's in that sort of yellow, half-blooded, not very astringent, but still a little bit astringent sort of custard stage that you're describing. So
Hmm.
it's interesting that you prefer it in that perfect cider window.
Yeah. Well, go figure. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, I love them that way, but I also really like them when they're good and brown and chocolatey. So that's kind of where that name, I think, derives from. But yeah, really, it's just an English shortcut because I can say people say, "What's a sorb?" and I say, "Oh, well, it's kind of like a medlar." Oh, what's a medlar? Or, it's endlessly self-referential until you bring in something familiar to people like pear.
Yeah. Yeah. But they're getting there through these conversations that we're having right now. So there's a small collection of folks in the world that are really big fans of the Sorbus Domestica. You being one, we have the French Pope Arnold, who is one, and I have this amazing copy of this book here. I'm going to have a link in the show notes. Can you help me with the author's name here?
Vitek Hrdoušek.
And Vitek wrote this lovely, lovely book that is translated into English, and Ben helped with that translation there. I haven't had a lot of luck finding copies of this book anywhere to be able to reference people. You're smiling right now. Do you know like how folks I mean, it's incredible. There's like all these images and photos and just absolutely incredible for anyone who wants to know more.
Yeah, we were doing US distribution of that book through Burnt Ridge Nursery, where I used to work. I was essentially mailing cash to VTech in an envelope, and then he would send me books to the US, and we'd sell them through the nursery. I think I made like a dollar or two on every sale. It was
Yeah.
not a profit enterprise. Yeah, nursery made a little bit, but that was the best way that I found at the time to distribute them nationally. If people want copies, they can reach out to me through Instagram and I can try to figure out. I'm not sure if I still have some packed away or I might have to get some sent over, but I certainly can do. But yeah, price wise, probably looking at with all of the international shipping and everything, you know, $35 or $40 a copy.
Yeah, easy, and it's worth it. The title of the book is Service Tree, the tree for a new Europe. And what I found really interesting about it is just how it goes through the history and all these just again amazing photos. So this is definitely something that I recommend everybody has in their bookshelf. And mine is pretty well worn out. And I saw that you talked a little bit about the U.S. and even talked about that little Czech Republic tree at the Arnold Arboretum. It was really cool to see that there. Was that was a surprise to me.
Yeah, he gave me a couple of pages of my own in there, so I got
Uh,
just yeah. He wanted a chapter on Sorbus domestica in the U.S., and that turned out to be a two-page chapter. It's not very long.
Well, it's long enough for now. Anyway, so let's catch people up here. In many ways, this conversation has been and I catching up, but also to give everyone listening out there in Ciderville a reference point for this really magnificent tree. I've had past episodes where it's like, can sorbs save the world? I almost feel like they can. They're just this incredible tree that provides so much, not just the fruit, not the fact that it's just related to apples and pears and medlars and quince, which is super, super cool, but also the wood itself and the particular kind of leaves. So let's start there a little bit. Let's give folks an idea about the tree and any kind of historical stuff that you've been finding out in your travels. Because one of the reasons why we're talking to Ben is that this past summer you were over in Europe, in Croatia. You went to France.
I did spot a few in Slovakia, but I didn't go to see the. Unfortunately, I didn't go to see the oldest Sorbus domestica tree in the world, which is near Bratislava. I did catch the second oldest one in the world, and we'll talk about that. Czech Republic, the Moravia region, which sort of straddles the present-day border between the Czech Republic and Slovakia, is where I spent the most time and definitely saw the most trees. That's where the Sorbus domestica museum is, and that's where they have the annual, actually twice annual festival. They have one
Twice
in the
in it.
spring and
Wow.
fall, but this was the harvest festival.
Very cool. And you're also in the UK too, because we're corresponding kind of like, I don't know, we're following each other or something while we were over there at the same time earlier this summer.
That either right before or right after you in Bristol, and I think by the time I realized you were there, I had already gone down south to Brighton or something like that.
But you were able to find a Sorbus domestica
I
there.
stumbled on one in Somerset. I had a old sort of what is it? It's like an old estate that's become a museum and sort of public gardens place. And right next to each other, there was one Sorbus domestica loaded with fruit, really nice tree. I would guess it's under 100 years old. And then right next to it was the Sorbus torminalis, also loaded with fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Either self pollinating or possibly cross pollinating. I'm not sure.
Interesting. Yeah. I know, speaking to the tree officer in London, and that is Colleen. She's, the second half of Duck Chicken Cider. And she also happens to be a tree officer, which is super cool. And she has mentioned that there's some in London too. So I know that there's eyes out in the world on it. And when you find one, you just can't unsee it after that. It's really tremendous. So, okay, so let's talk about the tree itself because it is unique. It doesn't look like an apple tree or a pear tree. It kind of looks kind of like when it's fully grown, it almost looks like a giant oak, like a sprawling oak. Is that you're nodding your head? Yeah.
Yeah, I was just writing a message to someone earlier today about that because I think it can be really interestingly cryptic. There's a picture I had just put up of one that has this conical form, and somebody remarked to me that it looked like a sequoia. I think it looks just like a metasequoia, the dawn redwood in its form.
Mm,
And if I saw it from 30 feet away, it's what I would
mm.
think it is, all the way down to the bark. But sure enough, it's a Sorbus domestica. And yeah, oak, they're often compared to, especially the ones growing out in like a field environment with these big spreading crowns. The leaves, even though they're compound pinnate leaves, from a distance do sort of look like oak leaves. And then, yeah, particularly the bark and the growth form. But growing in a forest environment, they can be these sort of small, multi-stemmed trees. One individual has several trunks, and the largest one I saw in the forest when I found these wild type trees was probably 3 or 4 inches in diameter.
Hmm.
So really diverse growth habits depending on the environment. And I've also now seen ones. I found a wild one in Spain, and that one had a really sort of scraggly growth habit in this I assume very drought prone, rocky mountain environment up in the Pyrenees. So they
Hmm.
can take a lot of different shapes.
Yeah, and it seems like they can grow in like less than desirable soil. Is that what you've been able to see, or you
They're
know?
amazingly widely adapted when I think of just their sort of, if not native range, the range that they're well suited to in Europe goes from northern Africa, basically almost desert environment. I believe they grow into Morocco, up to the British Isles, which is similar enough to the temperate rainforest, like where I live
Hmm.
here. Central Europe, you've got hot, humid summers and super rainy, cold winters. I think it's a zone 5 or zone 6 there, and it can grow all the way up into Ukraine. And I think it's known from Iran, Turkey, the Middle East. But the epicenter of the wild diversity, I think, is in Spain, in fairly arid, mountainous, rocky environments like that. It grows on the side of volcanoes, like in what is it, Mount Etna in Sicily,
Hmm.
Vesuvius by Salerno. So yeah, super widely adapted in terms of soil, for everything from heavy clay to sand and rocks. Seems to do okay in really acidic soils. Also seems to do fine in more alkaline ones.
Hmm.
And then just that range of places where it's extremely hot. In Spain, places it could be, I don't know, upwards of 120 degrees Fahrenheit, but it can really take the cold as well. So, in the US, to me, that suggests it could grow as far south as Southern California, probably as far north as Southern Alaska. And it seems to do fine in the Midwest, seems to do okay in the Northeast. I would suspect it could grow in Appalachia as long as it doesn't get hit with fire blight or something like that.
Is it susceptible to fire blight? Is that what you've been seeing?
From what I've read, we don't have fire blight here in the Pacific Northwest, generally speaking. So I can't say one way or the other, but I think there's probably a bit of variability in how resistant it is.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I do know it tends to hit a lot of things in that palm family, like pears.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I haven't heard that yet, so fingers crossed. You never know. Might have good news here. But one thing that I remember talking to Arnold about is that it was being used in experiments within vineyards to provide a little bit of shade. And I thought that was just kind of something to really put a pin on, especially with the heat cranking up. And sometimes you're getting apples that are getting scorched because of the sun and, just drying out the area. So, what would that look like in the future if you could plant one of these trees in an orchard or in various spots and they grow, straight up like well, we'd say like a cedar tree where you are or a eastern white pine out where I am here in the East Coast. And I would think that that could probably be a good practical measure to take if you're really getting like that burn that comes through in a real hot area. Did you see any of that type of planting or hear any discussions on that topic at all?
Yeah, in Moravia, they do still plant them in the vineyards. I think that practice might date back to the time when they were using the fruit in the winemaking itself, which I
Hmm.
know you've talked with Arnold about and we've
Yeah.
talked about a bit. I think they're doing the same in France, like you mentioned, but I didn't see that directly with my own eyes, and I don't know the extent to which, but it makes a lot of sense to me. For one thing, the sorbs tend to bloom and set fruit later than apples and pears, and I think that might help avoid some of the sun scorching issues. Where I've seen really bad sun scorch was the year in June that we had 115 degrees Fahrenheit, and those apples were relatively young at that point, and they scorched real bad. The other nice thing about the late blooming is a little bit less frost susceptibility. I know that when you get a late frost, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago in the Northeast, I know you had a
Yeah.
real bad one that knocked off a lot of the blossoms or young fruit
Hmm.
from apples and pears. The sorbs bloom later and set fruit later, and that's, I think, having that diversity of bloom time is, a way of hedging your bets if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So again, any orchardists out there listening, this is definitely a worthy tree for so many reasons to check out. And we will again have links with all those past episodes so we aren't kind of repeating, but really it's kind of worth repeating to tell you the truth. It's just such an amazing tree. Like the wood was used for the olive presses, the screws, and the presses for the cider presses. And every time I see an ancient cider press, I go up and I ask, what is that wood made out of? And most people don't know.
Yeah.
Even museums don't necessarily know. And the ones that always kind of impress me are those really old screws. And this is a screw that will, kind of push down on like the rack and cloth at that time would have been straw and just, squeezing the apple, the pumice and the juice out. And I don't know, it's just a little kind of like if you could find out what that wood is, I bet it would be Sorbus domestica. I mean, I can't guarantee it, but it just makes sense that is. And yeah, I could go on about that. That is a little sidebar.
Yeah, I remember Arnold saying that it was played a role in the Industrial Revolution, that ability to fashion working parts out of this incredibly dense wood. I mean, you can't make screws and things out of just any tree, so you definitely need something that's real durable,
Yeah.
and this one fits the bill.
Yeah. Especially, like people often think of oak and using that, but it chips. So it wouldn't really work well for cogwheels and what they needed
Yeah.
during the Industrial Revolution.
And I
So,
wonder if the demand for timber in that period of time is part of why there are relatively few trees left standing. I think a lot of them may have been cut down at that time for that reason,
mhm,
and as the appreciation of the fruit was waning.
yeah. Well, it's something to watch out for because now people are definitely having an eye on it. But let's go back onto your travel. So you were out in Croatia, in the Czech Republic. I've been seeing these fantastic photos coming up on your Instagram. Wow, what were you doing? I mean, just like hunting down every single sorb that you could find, and what were like baskets on the side of the road that people were selling. What's the setup there?
In Croatia, I've just been curious about Croatia for a while, in part because I know that there is a lot of wild type Sorbus domestica growing there, and there is a culture of harvesting and using the fruit.
Hmm.
So I had a bit of time in between being in France with Arnold, and I was on my way eventually to Moravia for the festival. So I took the long route through Switzerland, through Slovenia, and into Croatia, just sort of with my eyes open and my ears perked.
Hmm.
Slovenia, I think, is also Sorbus domestica hotspot, but I didn't get out in the country as much. I was just in the capital city, which was lovely, but I didn't find any sorbs there. In Croatia, I went to the market, the main one of the main markets there, and immediately saw the fruit for sale. I suspect there's a lot more to know there too, but I can't speak the language. But I did see the fruit for sale, and that then led me to sort of wander off into the villages. And to my surprise, I found people growing Sorbus domestica in their yards. I think I saw probably close to 10 trees in people's yards in this small neighborhood on the outskirts of Zagreb.
Wow.
And that was wonderful, including the tree I put a picture up of just growing on a street corner next to a stop sign in this little cement planter box. Really nice fruit on that one, a decent size and good flavor, and lots of seeds inside because there's so many trees in the area. They're all cross pollinating, so you get a lot of fertility. From there, I wandered off into the woods, and that's where I found the wild type trees actually growing just in the forest. And that was something that I knew they existed, but I'd never seen it myself. So that was thrilling.
You were at a botanical garden, but outside of the botanical garden was in the forest near Medvednica.
I think it's Medvednica.
That it's kind of like the wild apple forest of Kazakhstan, but
Yeah.
not quite. Is it? Is it like that? I mean, like
Well,
how
it felt that way to me. I think the equivalent would probably actually be in Spain, maybe near Valencia. VTech took a Sorbus road trip a couple of years through Spain and was finding all of these wild type tree diversity. I mean, I think he found like 200 wild Sorbus domestica growing in the mountains there.
wow.
So he knows more than I do about the sort of cradle of diversity, maybe in Spain. I'm not certain about that.
Hmm.
I found these trees growing in the forest, just among the others, like
Hmm.
crab apples.
That is so cool. I would love to see that. Now, the actual fruit, which let's explain like their size to folks who have never seen one, and the you mentioned a bit about the color, but how they grow and what that looks like.
Yeah, so the fruit grows. This is actually an interesting point that Arnold made to me, that the blossoms emerge from the same bud as the leaves, and that's a bit unusual for pomes because normally you have a separate bud for flowers and a separate bud for leaves. I think Torminalis does the same. I think Torminalis and Domestica are the only two that I can think of. Well, maybe other sorbus do too. I have to walk that back. But compared with apples, pears, hawthorns, medlars, quinces, they do have that unique feature of all the flowers and leaves coming out of one single bud at the same time.
Mhm.
The fruit grows in a cluster, what you might call a panicle, I think. So the flowers look like any other rose family flower. They look a bit like hawthorn or rowan, mountain ash flowers. And the fruits tend to grow, I think there could be anything from 3 to a dozen fruits in a cluster. Typically, they're, I don't know, 3 to 5 centimeters long. So what's that, an inch to an inch and a half in length and about as wide. But they can be really diverse in their shape. So I've seen ones that are only a half an inch long, and I've seen ones that are probably closer to 2 inches big. They can be yellow is probably the most common, and in the wild type, I think a yellowish green is the most common color. But if they get enough sun, and depending on the variety, they can be quite red. In some cases, all red, like a Bartlett pear or something. They can also be russet, like a Bosc pear, completely russet, or they can have different degrees of russeting going on. So yeah, a lot of different shapes, a lot of different colors. They tend to have these lenticels on the fruit, these little specks,
Mhm.
and sometimes there are very, very few, sometimes there's tons of them. In an attempt to stir the pot, I did write something on one of my posts that I thought that the diversity of sorbs in the past, could have rivaled the diversity of apples. That's probably an exaggeration. I was just trying to see if anyone would argue with me.
Well, I did notice that comment that you put up there, and I was like, "Go Ben!" I mean, it made me start wondering like how many different varieties there are. And is it like apples? Because I have Sorbus domestica here growing that is from seeds. So can I expect that seed then to grow into that original tree, or is it kind of like apples? It's always like a new entity into its own. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not.
Arnold says it's 50-50. For example, like the russeting trait. He says if you plant seeds from a tree with total russet fruit, half the offspring will be russet and half are not. I can't verify that personally. I haven't grown seeds to fruition yet with that sort of record keeping or anything, but that's what he told me. I think there's some correlation between size. I think larger fruits tend to have larger seeds. I've found that those larger seeds tend to produce more vigorous seedlings, and I believe you're likelier to get large fruit. So I don't think it's quite as much of a random sort of a grab bag the way that apples are. They say you just sort of shake up and you get this big genetic mess out the other side. But I still think there's some correlation in terms of size, color. Some of those traits do come relatively true from seed, but I'm not completely sure on that because the 3 trees that I've gathered fruit from in Seattle are almost certainly from the same single seed source, and they have three completely different size and shape of fruit that ripen at completely different times of year, and they're siblings, I believe, of the tree in the Zagreb Botanic Garden in Croatia that I also visited, and that fruit visually is a little bit similar, but the size and the quality are a bit different too. So there's definitely a lot of variation. I just don't know to what extent.
Are people grafting over there? Is that how they are kind of creating their own little Sorbus domestica orchard, or do people go out in the forest and dig up a tree and plant it in their spot? I mean, and what have you done? Because I know you've done a bit of that, right? Kind of like propagating.
I've done exclusively seed propagation.
Okay.
The main reason for that is just in the process of trying to introduce these trees more widely in North America, I'd rather have as much genetic diversity as possible, at least the sort of first wave. I think the second wave would be once those trees start fruiting to try to identify better quality fruits and then graft those. There are some absolutely incredible named varieties from Italy in particular. I've got pictures that I haven't posted yet, but they'll be up soon. And by the time anyone hears this, they'll definitely be up. Really interesting shapes, colors, and in particular sizes. So I believe in Sicily and southern Italy, there's a lot more tradition of grafting sorbs and selecting these named varieties that have really, really nice fruit quality, great flavor, and are more suitable for fresh eating. I mean, these ones can be really, really large. I think they weigh up to 50 or 60 grams and, you know, maybe 2.5 inches long, even.
Like a sickle pear, right?
Yeah,
You
they're
know,
approaching
about,
size.
yeah, a good
As
size, so you
large
could eat it.
as a medlar or something.
Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Well, that's exciting because what I am gathering from what you've been posting from your travels, and you just seems like you're finally catching up with all those photos,
Way
is
behind.
that there there is variation. There's variation in color, and that that statement that it would kind of rival Apple, well, probably not, but it does lend itself to kind of like consider, okay, well, you have Sorbus domestica, a whole different varieties growing in Croatia, a whole bunch of different varieties growing in France, right? We don't really know, what the lineage is. Some in the UK, and just a couple here in the United States. Historically, like it's like nada, like there was none here, and so they've been brought over. And we keep on referring to Arnold because he always wants us to hunt down one in Baltimore that I think, I don't know, was Ben Franklin or George Washington brought over, something like that.
Yeah, he told me George Washington had one growing on his estate, and that tree died, I think, sometime in the middle of last century.
Hmm.
But he thinks there might be offspring somewhere in the DC area.
Yeah.
And I think he thinks it's probably easier than it is for me to just pop over and check it out.
Well, there's
He
also,
really wanted to check out these 20 odd trees near Geneva too, and unfortunately I didn't make it. I still have his tape measure though.
oh, in New York.
No, Switzerland actually.
Oh, okay. All right. I wasn't sure. Geneva could
That's
be, you know.
another story.
Yeah. All right. Well, so, I mean, that tells us that they've been kind of sprinkled around. And going back to that George Washington story, I mean, that was like a gift that he brought over, I believe, to plant here. I think it was from France, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I could be wrong. It could have been Jefferson too. My founding father's knowledge is a little bit hazy.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and listen to that, and maybe Arnold will listen to this and correct us both, which is we could count on him for doing that. Thank you, Arnold. Anyways, and now we also know that there's some Sorbus domestica in California, right? There's a small collection of trees there outside of San Francisco. And then, of course, you've been documenting it up in the Seattle area. All volunteers, the ones in California planted, right? But in
Yeah,
Seattle, it sounds like those are volunteers.
they're planted too. There's three specimens in a botanical garden. One planted as a street tree, so that's four. And then in Portland, the botanical garden just had one tree, and it's a beautiful, beautiful old tree with a spreading crown. They now have. I gave them three seedlings from seeds that I brought back from the Czech Republic, which they planted, and as far as I know, at least two of them are still alive. So hopefully their collection. I was trying to create a rivalry between them and Seattle and say, well, Seattle has three. you should have four, but I think one of them may have died. So yeah, hopefully they'll have at least three.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. So in between this time that we talked in season 7, I think that was 3 years ago, you were part of a nursery and you were propagating these trees. It sounds like some were shipped out around the country. Is that true? Do we have sorbs growing in a number of different states now? And like how many states can you give a guess of what that would be?
Yeah, I didn't keep the firmest records, but I believe that probably over 1,000 seedlings were distributed
Oh,
in partnership with Burnt Ridge, which I was germinating those seeds and propagating them and caring for them, and then the nursery was distributing them through mail order, and they shipped to all 50 states. So
wow.
you know, not including Hawaii, where I don't think they do very well. There's a decent chance that somebody in each of the 48 continental states may now have a tree,
That is super cool.
or
Wow.
several, for cross pollination.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, just listeners out there hearing that, this all kind of started from like these conversations and this affection that we got for Sorbus domestica. I mean, how did that happen for you, Ben? I mean, how did you get this bug to kind of seek out these trees, bringing you all the way from the Pacific Northwest all the way into Eastern Europe to search for them?
It was a series of coincidences. I'd already planned to travel to the Czech Republic in 2019, chasing family roots there, though my roots are in central Bohemia and western Bohemia, not in Moravia at all. But we were passing through Moravia on our way to Bohemia, and having heard about this tree and knowing that there was the museum and that there was this epicenter of appreciation, we figured just to cast a few lines and see if we could meet people that were involved and interested and wanted to share that information. And we did. We ended up staying with some really wonderful people in Petrov, which is in Moravia, in the sort of wine region known for its wine cellars. And that's an amazing town. And then Vitek, I got in touch with Vitek through, I guess, a mutual acquaintance. And he invited us to come to the museum and come see his orchard, which is an amazing, talk about grafting. He's got dozens, if not hundreds of varieties grafted onto several trees. That each tree is a living library of varieties from all over Europe, some of the best selections. And then he grows seeds from those.
Hmm.
And yeah, I think his enthusiasm was infectious. And just seeing the amount of care that he put into his museum and in his propagation efforts. I mean, he's been involved with planting thousands of, I think he said 3,000, but don't quote me on that, thousands of trees throughout his region.
Hmm.
Yeah, he's been planting trees all over Moravia along the streets and along the walking trails. And he said, I think every fifth tree that he plants is a Sorbus domestica.
Well, if you haven't seen this tree before, there's a good chance in the future you will. Just walk around with your eyes wide open and, you know, probably here in the US, they're not going to be looking like the giant oaks. Although I will say, all I have been doing since I got those seeds going is clearing land on my property so I could plant them and know that they're going to have a forever spot because they grow and then they live for a very long time. So let's go back to like the oldest one. I mean, how old is the oldest Sorbus domestica?
That depends on who you ask.
Okay.
Vitek says they can live up to 600 years.
Oh,
Arnold typically says 400 is the top limit. And I'm not sure who's right about that. But
at that
yeah,
point,
I
who
would say
cares?
hundreds of years.
Yeah.
The oldest tree is in Slovakia, and I haven't seen it, although I could have done. The second oldest tree is called Adamtskova, and that one grows near where Vitek is based in Moravia.
Does that
Um,
mean something out of Mitskia?
I believe it means Adamitz's tree. So it refers to the property owner,
Oh,
or probably a historic property owner going back a certain way.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's It's an incredibly beautiful tree. I've got photos of that I also haven't posted, but you'll see them soon enough.
I like the photo of you in front of a sorb that you posted there, where it's towering over you in the background. That looks classically like a oak tree, with a nice big trunk and then this beautiful umbrella canopy.
That
Wow.
was in France, and Arnold told me that he walked by that tree multiple times, possibly many different visits, looking for. He knew there was this big Sorbus domestica. He was looking for it, and he kept walking by this tree and saying, "Oh, it's a nice oak, but it's not the tree I'm looking for." Turned out it's a massive Sorbus domestica standing all by itself in a field. The trunk is enormous. The crown is beautiful, and that's the one that makes. There's a picture of my hand holding a cluster of gigantic russet fruits.
Yeah.
There's got to be like 10 or more fruit in that cluster, and they're huge. Yeah, and completely russet. They look like little bosks.
Wow. Yeah. All right. Well, let's go to France now. Let's shift a little bit. Maybe we'll go back to Croatia. But France, you met up with Arnold, who is, just a total sorb head, right? Let's call it for what it is. He is he has the same affliction where he just can't not talk about it and is always on the search for it. I was able to hang out with him 2 years ago, I think, or a year ago, and he took me around in the area where, not too far from where he grew up. It seemed like it wasn't too far. I don't know. We were just lost in Sorbland. We went out like the
In
next
Normandy.
morning in Normandy. Yeah, I wasn't in Paris with him at all. Did you get out into Normandy?
No, I came into Le Havre on the ferry, but I met with him in Paris, and that's where I stayed a couple of nights in his apartment, and
Okay.
we chased sorbs all over the greater metropolitan area.
I've heard about that. He's kind of tried to entice me there, but I'm always kind of off doing a cider tour or something like that. But the time that I spent with him, it was like rows of cormé going down and a town center where they were growing all around and just amazing specimens. And then in private homes where they had a sorb growing, just a giant tree, almost looks like an elm. It's so tall. It really seemed like a lot of the trees would adapt very well to whatever the often hostile environment would give them, and it would just keep on growing and fruiting. And I was there in September, so we were seeing the fruit coming about. And then he goes out and collects all these for Marie, who does a cormé too.
Hmm.
I've had her on the podcast, and that is a fantastic rendition of using both the sorb and cider too at the same time. Unlike Eric Bordelais, where his is all gourmet.
Oh, so she's co-fermenting.
I believe, yeah, yeah,
Thing.
yeah,
Yeah, I didn't try her product at all, but I would love to. Hopefully next
yeah,
time I'm in the area.
yeah. And she does a nice job because the label itself is kind of like a little, almost like a wooden label on it, and but very very different. Now hers, the bottles that I had of hers didn't last long. I just shared them with the tour group that I was leading the following week. But when I return, I hope to get some and bring some back. So we'll see how they age. Now, Eric Bordelais, started making gourmet, as he calls it. That's what he just puts on his label. Back in 2017 was his first rendition of that came out. And I've been lucky enough to have every year that he's been able to produce it and to see how it's evolved. And I have to admit, when it first came out, it was like I had it in 2018, the 2017, and it tasted very sweet and too almost like that kind of like perry that could be like a lot of sorbitol, a lot of like residual sweetness that was just not really to my liking.
Hmm.
And then most recently on the last French tour there, which was in 24, he was bringing out from his library, and I had a 2018 and it really blew my mind. It was so evolved, had changed in that time, like it needed that, as the French will often call it, the transformation in the bottle and that rest and sitting there. And it was nothing like I had originally tasted and had really developed this complexity. The sweetness had mellowed out, and it was an absolute journey unto its own, unlike any cider I tasted. It was really a standalone. And that's the one I was like seeing greatness. And it really I think I was getting a little like, okay, this is cool, but I don't really, not wowed by the product. And that and what Marie had made, both makers really wowed me. So what is your experience on that now? You've been able to taste some product now.
I've tried the Bordelais from either 2017 or 2018. I was able to find it through an importer in Seattle. I think he just had two bottles, and I bought them both. And I drank one straight away, and definitely found it a bit on the sweet side for my preference with cider. I like things really quite dry.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, immediately right off the bat, I was picking up a lot of those aromatics that I know well from tasting a lot of the fresh fruit or blooded fruit. I even think there's a bit of chocolate note in the flavor, definitely sort of a spice, the pear, and just flavors I have a hard time naming that really interact symphonically in the in the palate. So I drank one of them, but that was 2020 or 21. So they had been a few years in the bottle. Not to mention they'd been shipped across an ocean and kept in a warehouse. The other bottle I think I finally drank in a few years later, and I don't know that I noticed how much it had changed one to the other, but still definitely had a lot of that residual sweetness. What I tried with Arnold when I stayed with him in Paris was either 2023 or 24, and that was to me just remarkably different, a lot drier, and Arnold told me that's intentional.
He's
That
changed
he
his
started.
technique. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so what Arnold told me was that in his initial couple of years, he was stopping fermentation early, allowing the residual sugar and keeping the alcohol low in the range that people expect from a cider, that sort of, I don't know, 4 or 5%, to avoid creating a product that was more wine-like, since he's known as a cider maker. This
Mm-hmm.
is like second or third hand information now at this point, so I'm not certain that about this, but what Arnold said is that in more recent years he's been letting that fermentation go further to completion, and so you've got a drier product with a higher alcohol. I think if you ferment all the sugars out of the sorb juice, you can get something that's 8, 9% or more, maybe even in the double digits,
Mm-hmm.
just because the sugar content is that much higher in sorbs compared with apples and pears.
Yeah.
So that alone, I think, is really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, I really really liked the more recent vintage. Just for my taste. I feel
Mm-hmm.
if the sugar's there, why not ferment all of it?
Yeah, no, I get it. And it kind of makes sense that he's kind of been refining it because it was a new product that nobody had been making for a long time. It existed and people are distilling it also outside of Paris. You could get some of spirit. Were you able to try any of that with Arnold when you were there in Paris?
Didn't try sorb spirits in France,
Okay.
but in Eastern Europe now I've tried a lot.
Maybe eventually that'll be happening here in the US as more fruit gets available. I know that there's definitely an interest that gets, spiked every time we have these conversations here on Cider Chat.
I've sent seeds and plants to multiple cider makers around the United States, all of whom have expressed the intention of making. So I mean, we're probably 20 years away, but something to look forward to.
It takes
Should we? Long.
it takes a while. I mean, I have my little trees, and just because they haven't gone into the ground, I keep on moving around in big plants. Because again, I'm trying to clear other trees, which seems like my winter project every year. And I don't know if is it going to be like a pear tree, like in 3 years I could expect fruit. I mean, I'm past that 3 year period now, but I think once they get in the ground, they're going to go hog wild. And the tap root is supposed to be like super, super deep too. It could go like way down, it could go as deep as the tree is high. So that's why I'm being, I don't know, maybe super overcautious. I could tell it wants to be in the ground, but now it's sitting out in my garden right now, being, all nested down for the winter. And this winter I'll go out and take down more trees to plant trees. So go figure. It's crazy.
Yeah, I've heard they can tap really far down, which is part of how they're so drought resistant.
Yeah.
Like a standard apple tree or probably deeper. So really well rooted.
Yeah. It just absolutely fascinates me. Okay. So we know that these trees can grow quickly They are great, like sun protection, while also allowing some light in. The wood is remarkable. They're resistant to the drought, and they, have that massive taproot. We know all this. What are you doing with all this, Ben? What are you doing with all this info? Like as you're going forward, is there something that you see like that? There's a missing piece. I mean, what would you tell people who have this interest right now to kind of pursue it? Because is anybody selling Sorbus domestica in the U.S. at this point? Is a nursery that you're part of before still doing that?
Burnt Ridge should still have some available.
Okay.
And I'll probably grow some this year. I'm moving around a lot, so I will have to figure out where I can house some seedlings this year. But I've been growing seedlings every year since 2019, distributing them as gifts. I've been selling them to people locally. I've sent them, like I said, all over the place to orchardists and cider makers. And through Burnt Ridge, I think we probably distributed, if not 1,000, then close to it. And they should still have some number of young seedlings. I'm hopefully going to check in with them in the next week or so. So that would be the best sort of like national scale nursery to contact about them if people are looking. If people want seeds, they can also get in touch with me. January might be getting a little bit late to start new seeds from stratification, but yeah, I'm happy to share seeds with people who are interested in trying to grow them from seed. Yeah.
What has been your experience there if they're planted in amongst kind of a more forest situation?
The forest trees weren't producing very much fruit. So I think if you
Okay.
want fruit, then it's better to give them more space,
Mm-hmm.
more sunlight. They remind me of nut trees in this way, where if they're growing really close together, then they reach tall for height.
Mm-hmm.
So when I've seen chestnuts in the forest, they're single trunk and the nearest branches are way up there. When they're given more light, they can be really spreading and have low branches. Generally, these fruits, like chestnuts, are going to be harvested off the ground, so I don't think that's a huge disadvantage. The trees I know in Seattle are probably planted 15 feet apart from each other, and they're quite tall. They produce a lot of fruit, but given the size that they can reach, if you have the room, 25 or 30 feet spacing is probably ideal.
Yeah.
Uh,
Not always an option, but if you have it, yeah, totally do it. Why not?
yeah, but I wouldn't let that stop anyone. If you've got room to put a couple of trees in 10 or 15 feet apart, I think they'll do fine. They'll probably just reach for more height.
Mm-hmm. How about the thalia?
Oh. Yeah,
I'm
that was
sorry.
something interesting I saw in
Yeah.
in Croatia in the Zagreb Botanical Garden. Was they were growing a tree on the espalier,
Yeah.
and I'd never seen that before. They've pruned it really aggressively and tied it off to wire. That tree wasn't fruiting yet. It's probably 10 years old or less,
Mm-hmm.
but just another interesting way that people are playing with
Mm-hmm.
growing that species. So I was happy to see it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And how about grafting it? Was there any like rootstock that people were going for to like graft it at all?
As far as I know, the best rootstocks in terms of matching up the growth rate are onto Sorbus domestica seedling or onto Sorbus terminalis. It can apparently be grafted onto medlar, quince, or hawthorn, even pear, like a pyrus rootstock.
Mm.
But everything I've heard and read is that the growth rate doesn't match up, and sooner or later you get a real mismatched graft union that's unstable.
Mm.
So yeah, I would probably graft it onto seedlings, which is another reason to grow a lot of seedlings.
Yeah,
And I believe that's what VTech has done in the Czech Republic.
very cool. So for folks who are interested about Sorbus domestica, we'll have links to get a hold of Ben here, of course. And if they're traveling over into Eastern Europe, there's the Sorbus event that is happening. And can you just say a little bit about that and when that happens in the spring and in the summer? Sounds
They
like.
have one in May, I believe. That's sort of when the tree is in blossom. And then the one that I went to was it's normally in mid to late September during the harvest time for the fruit. So at that point, that's when they have the sort of pomological exhibition with as many different fruit sizes and shapes and varieties laid out. And that's where I got to see a lot of the named grafted varieties. in the flesh for the first time. They also, well, probably at both, they bring out all the brandy, those Krušovice, for tasting and general drinking. Since Moravia is a wine region, I tried for the first time there a Sorbus wine. It's a sorb and grape co-ferment that was really interesting, a white wine that's fermented with sorbs, and a lot of that flavor comes through. Yeah, I think they brew a sorb beer in that region, but that's kind of up and coming product. Yeah, so, and that's where the Sorbus Domestica Museum is. It's moved since I first went. It used to be right in the village center in Tvarešna Lehota. Now it's a little bit outside the village.
Mm-hmm. And do you know what the name of the festival is at all?
Yeah, it's Oskarusha Brani. Or if people look up like a Sorbus Domestica Slavnost, you'll probably find it.
You got to get a little bit of the jive there from the country. Some of these names and the verbiage is a little bit different for like an English speaker like myself. But, once you're there, you have a little bit of Sorbus Domestica wine. You'll be able to start singing it. No problem.
Yeah, I don't speak Czech at all, for the record. I mean, I have some idea how the words are pronounced, but yeah, I'm very dependent on people helping me out with translation, usually folks on the younger side. But I met people that spoke some amount of English, throughout the area.
Ben, this is just incredible. It just makes me happy talking about these little orbs that are just delicious and do just so much for the world. I don't know. I really feel like there's a reason we're talking about it. And I have a sense the work that you've done, the groundwork that you've laid 50 years from now, maybe after we're all long gone, I have a feeling that people are going to be fermenting it probably here stateside at another level and have a real curiosity. And this is the footing for them to get a hold of. And I mean, that's how it starts everywhere, right? There weren't cider apples in France, they all kind of rolled our way slowly and slowly. And, here we are today. So I really appreciate everything you did in that book and the continued work. And we're just going to be following the further tales of the chocolate pear.
Yeah, there's definitely more to come. And I think, particularly as we look at, a changing climate, maybe a rapidly changing climate, and a lot of other things changing, I think that the possibility of sorbs to be a bit more resilient in a long term, I think is really important. I think sooner or later we'll probably have to re-examine some of the ways that apples in particular are being grown on these dwarfing rootstocks with heavy irrigation, in what's reclaimed desert, at least in the case of like Eastern Washington State and Columbia Valley. And I think that, these trees with a long lifespan, a deep root system, and the ability to produce a really large amount of fruit with low intervention, I think could be really important to the future of food and the future of cider.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, there's a lot to be gained here.
I never could have guessed at the sort of characters that I would meet and people, places I would go to stay and study with just over the course of this trip. So
That's awesome.
I'm thankful to you for putting people in touch with each other. I think that's amazing. Really appreciate it. It's great to see you again and great to talk, and definitely we'll keep in touch.
Find the show notes for this here episode by going to ciderchat.com. There's a little search bar and you could put in number 487 or Sorbus Domestica, chocolate pears, or our featured guest, Ben Kunesh. And up should pop a number of episodes, including this one today. And while you're there, please hit the donate button for Cider Chat. This is a listener-supported podcast. Become a patron today at Cider Chat Patreon. That's spelled Patreon. And with that, I leave you here. This is Real Windcaller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville. Drink it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Yeehaw!